I'm Tracy. It's just my husband, our daughter, and me in the family. And I'm currently pregnant with our second child. Yet, the moment we went back to my in-laws' house, my mother-in-law, Susan, started ordering me around. Tracy, now that you're back, get started on dinner, will you? Yes. I reluctantly complied. I knew she was aware of my pregnancy. There was a faint hope that maybe she would treat me differently this time. But if nothing changed, I guess that's just how it is. Because that's always how I've been treated at my in-laws. When we visit the in-laws, all the household chores become my responsibility. Cleaning, laundry, cooking, everything is left to me. Well, there's just one thing I don't have to do. That's the shopping. Shopping is my husband's job. So, when my husband and I visit, all the housework is dumped on us. And what do my in-laws do? The answer is simple. My father-in-law, Dan, plays with our daughter, and Susan starts nagging at me. While pondering these things, I had finished preparing dinner. I thought I could finally take a breath, but then Susan suddenly came into the kitchen. Is dinner ready? Ah, yes. Just now. Then, next is cleaning the room. What? I'm pregnant, so let me rest a bit. Huh? Pregnancy doesn't matter. But. Quiet. Cleaning is your job. Get on with it. Her words really hit a nerve. Instinctively, I retorted. If you're so free, why don't you do it, Susan? Maybe I was feeling a bit unstable. Anyway, I usually hold back. But I just couldn't at that moment. I immediately thought, oh no. But it was too late. Susan, scowling, grabbed my right hand tightly. Why should I clean when there's a daughter-in-law? Well, that's. Quiet. Come here. She forcibly dragged me to the bathroom. There, I saw all the cleaning tools. Among them, Susan grabbed a bucket filled with water. Just as I had a bad feeling, she exclaimed. Oh, my hand slipped and splashed the water all over me. Ah. I quickly dodged, so I didn't end up soaked all over, but my legs were definitely wet. My favorite skirt was soaked too. What are you doing, Susan? You talked back to me. Get on with the cleaning. Susan glared at me. I recognized that look in her eyes. It was the same look she gave me when we first came to the in-laws' house. For the marriage introduction. I met my husband Ned in college in New York, far from our hometown. Introduced by a friend, we hit it off when we discovered we were from the same place. And eventually started dating. Even after graduating from college, our relationship continued, and I thought I might marry this person. It seemed he thought the same, and a few years after getting a job, he proposed. But then, he started saying something strange. I have something I need to tell you, Tracy. What? You know my family runs a food processing factory, right? Ned's family runs a food processing factory, and he joined it after graduating from college. But it seemed he wanted to talk about something else. As he hesitated, I pushed him to speak clearly. If you have something to say, just say it. Sorry, actually, I have an older brother, and he's supposed to take over the company. And? That's it. What's the problem? Well, Ned seemed a bit confused. Later, he told me he thought I was expecting him to take over the company. And might not marry him if he couldn't. No way. I want to marry him for who he is. Not for his company. Whether or not to take over the family. Business really doesn't matter to me. In fact, I even worry that inheriting it might lead to complications. That's why I told my husband this. Do you want to marry me? Or not? Which is it? I want to marry you. Then, that's fine. We'll think about family matters and such when we need to. With that, Ned suddenly smiled. It seemed my words cleared up his doubts. And so, we decided to get married. But when it came to the marriage proposal, Ned again looked troubled. When I asked what was wrong, he began to say weakly, maybe Mom won't approve. When I pressed for a reason, he began to explain the family situation bit by bit. Susan's father was the original owner of the factory, and now Dan, who married into the family, is the one managing it. But perhaps because it was her father's company to start with, it seems Susan holds the most power in the family. Her word is law at home, and nobody dares to contradict her. In essence, my in-law's house revolves around her. But she really loves my brother-in-law, and he's the only one who can push back at her. In short, don't go against Susan. Since Ned seemed so anxious, I prioritized winning over Susan. First, I picked her favorite sweets as a gift. I even changed my makeup and clothes to suit her tastes. I also had a secret weapon in mind. When we went to the in-laws' house for the marriage introduction, we were smoothly led to the sitting room, but Susan remained sullen the whole time. She kept staring at me intensely, so I finally asked her, Susan, is there something on me? No, nothing. I'm just against your marriage, that's all. Ned's worries were spot on. While he stayed silent, I could kind of see why she was against our marriage. Probably because my husband was getting married before my brother-in-law, who was supposed to inherit the business. Anyway, people who value seniority think the eldest son should inherit the family business first. I thought she believed my brother-in-law should marry first. So I shared my thoughts with her. Susan, it's amazing how you support Dad running the company, isn't it? I couldn't do it. I really respect you. Really? Susan cracked a smile for a moment. Feeling it was time to push further, I continued. So, when brother-in-law takes over, we too can support him, that's what we discussed. I said indirectly that I wouldn't oppose my brother-in-law taking over the house. Suddenly, Susan softened a bit, saying, "You seem to understand things quite well." "Thank you, well, I guess I could approve of the marriage." Her attitude softened slightly. That's when I made the final push. Actually, I was working at a local logistics company until recently. So, the last project I handled there. I told Susan about the opening of a direct store of an overseas brand near our in-laws' home. Moreover, there was a secret sale before the opening, which only invited guests could attend. And the transportation of the store's products was handled by the company I worked for. Is that so? So, I've got an invitation to the secret sale. I showed her the invitation to the secret sale that had been allocated to the logistics company I worked for. You have something good there. I'll give this to you, Susan. Really? Her eyes sparkled, just as I had researched. Susan indeed had a soft spot for this brand. Actually, I was the one invited, but I'm not interested in branded goods. Then, I'll go instead of you. Thus, Susan allowed our marriage. Perhaps because of that, my relationship with Susan had been good. However, we only met once a year at the in-laws. We didn't care enough about each other to worry about our relationship. So, I thought nothing much would happen, that's just what I casually thought. However, that relationship gradually began to change. I realized it had changed significantly when our daughter was born, I think. That year, feeling anxious about my first pregnancy, I spent most of my time at my parents' home. Of course, my husband didn't object, and he visited my parents' home whenever he had time off. But because I didn't show up at my in-laws, Susan seemed quite angry. When we went to my in-laws after our daughter was born, Susan, as if she had changed into a different person, started ordering me around. "Tracy, prepare dinner." "Ah, yes. Once that's done, start cleaning." "Yes, yes." At first, I had no idea why this was happening. But as I observed and heard Susan's words, I gradually understood the reason. She would grumble things like, "Staying home just because of pregnancy." And she would make such spiteful remarks. "Skipping housework because of pregnancy, that was unthinkable in my time." That's when I realized that not going to my in-laws during my pregnancy was why Susan was angry. But knowing the reason didn't help. It was already over, and there was nothing I could do about it now. I guess I just have to obediently listen to Susan for now. I thought so and obediently followed her orders. However, even that attitude seemed to irritate Susan. "Tracy, is the laundry done?" "Almost there." "Hurry up. You're really sluggish." Her hounding of her daughter-in-law showed no signs of stopping. Eventually, I was physically and mentally exhausted, and became reluctant to go to the in-laws. Still, visiting the in-laws was only about once a year. Unlike my brother-in-law, who was doted upon, my husband also had a weak position at the in-laws. When my husband went to see my in-laws, Susan took advantage of him just like she did with me. I thought about mentioning it to him, but I didn't want to cause him any worry. I just have to endure it while at my in-laws. I thought so and chose the path of endurance. Amidst all this, I became pregnant with our second child. Learning from my experience during my first pregnancy, I decided to visit the in-laws this time. To avoid complaints from Susan, I planned to increase the frequency of visits to the in-laws. A few days after discussing this with my husband, we visited the in-laws after my 4-month pregnancy checkup. As expected, my husband was sent out to shop by Susan. I figured I would be preparing the meal, but then Susan said this to me. "The baby's gender must be known by now?" Yes, I think it'll be known at the next checkup." The ultrasound to determine the baby's gender was scheduled for next month. But since it seemed like Susan was plotting something, I deliberately gave a vague reply. Then, looking at me sternly, she said, "Make sure it's a boy. I won't forgive you otherwise." "Huh? Why?" "We need an heir, an heir." The harsh look from Susan left me confused. The heir was supposed to be my brother-in-law. Then, his child would inherit. That's what I thought. But Susan was telling me to produce an heir. After thinking it over, I asked her, "Why should I produce an heir?" "Really, you're foolish. The heir will be Paul's child." Paul is my brother-in-law's name. Indeed, in Susan's mind, it seemed that my brother-in-law's child was supposed to inherit. Then, as I thought about this, Susan said, "Your child will be a spare." A spare. Spare. If something happens to Paul's child, having a spare will come in handy, won't it? Hearing those words, I was horrified. That such a person could exist. I truly became scared. Seeing Susan's true nature made me understand why my husband was afraid of her. He must have been raised as a spare for his brother. "Excuse me. I'll prepare dinner." I said that to Susan and left the scene. Afterwards, claiming I wasn't feeling well, I returned home early with my husband. Once home, I recounted everything that happened with Susan to my husband. He looked down and said, "I've always been told I was just a spare for my brother. What should we do? I don't want to go to my in-laws anymore. Actually, someone I met through work has invited me to join his company." "Really?" "Once the second child is born, I'll leave Dad's company and move there." "Are you sure?" "Yeah. It's out of the state, so it'll cut ties with home." My husband seemed resolute. I felt a bit relieved. But now is a crucial time. And we can't leave here until the child is born. I told myself to endure a little longer. As the year-end approached, we reluctantly went back to the in-laws. At 8 months pregnant, I could no longer move agilely. But thinking this would be my last visit to the in-laws, I endured and went. I thought they might let me rest a bit, but that was not the case at all. As usual, I was ordered to prepare dinner, and my husband was sent shopping. After dinner was prepared, I was ordered to clean, and I inadvertently snapped back. Then, I was taken to the bathroom and splashed with water. I was truly furious. Splashing water on a pregnant woman, I couldn't believe it. Just as I was about to yell at Susan, I heard a loud stomping sound. Then, with a bang, the bathroom door flew open. "Tracy. Are you okay?" "Ned." My husband had burst into the bathroom. Seeing me soaking wet, he turned to Susan and shouted, "What have you done, Mom?" My hand slipped." "Huh? Slipped? You did it on purpose." My husband was angrier than I had ever seen him. For once, Susan was under pressure. "It's not true. I really slipped. Enough. Stop making excuses. I'm really disappointed in you, Mom." "So, that's it. We're leaving. We'll never come back. Let's go, Tracy." My husband took my hand and led me out of the bathroom. And there stood Dan and our daughter. Dan glared at my husband. "Do you understand what it means to leave your family home?" "Yes, I'm quitting the company too." "Is that okay? Do you think someone like you can make it on your own? It's better than staying with such awful people. Don't ever get involved with us again." After saying that, my husband picked up our daughter. We quickly packed our things and the three of us dashed out of the in-laws' house. While we were comforting our nervous daughter, we drove over to my parents' home. Initially surprised, my parents quickly accepted us after. My husband explained the situation. And so, we cut ties with my in-laws. Later, waiting for the new year to start, my husband submitted his resignation to his father's company. He then changed jobs to the company where he had been invited to work. We also moved. Our daughter didn't seem to understand why we were moving. But I figured we could explain it to her over time. In any case, we felt truly refreshed having cut ties with the worst in-laws. A few months later, I gave birth to a healthy boy. And we started our family life in earnest. Through the grapevine, I heard that Dan's company had started to falter. The reason was that many business partners had left after my husband, who had handled all the sales, left the company. Anyway, the company was struggling. But that was no longer our concern. My husband and I talked about it, but it seems we couldn't just leave it at that. One day, Dan came to my husband's company and said, "Could you come to Paul's wedding? It looks bad if his brother is absent, please." Dan even knelt before my husband. Why would he go to such lengths? My husband asked him for the reason, and it seems he said, "The woman Paul is engaged to is the daughter of a president from one of our business associates. They've set a rule that he has to marry her for them to invest in our company." It appears that their marriage was arranged to help Dan's company. Of course, the woman on the other side was enthusiastic. But my brother-in-law didn't seem happy. However, he couldn't refuse for the sake of the company. Still intending to be absent, my husband said, "I'll decide after talking to Tracy." So he asked me, "We're not going, right?" Smiling, I responded, "Then let's go to the wedding." "Really? Are you sure?" "Of course. We haven't gotten our revenge yet." My husband was surprised. Yes, when I heard that story, a good method of revenge came to mind. I chose to attend the wedding to carry out that plan. I wouldn't dream of causing a scene on the wedding day, especially with all those people watching. That would only lead to people being upset with us. So, after the wedding was over and only close family remained in the back room, I executed my plan. Congratulations on this special day. My husband and I entered the back room. Then, Susan began to glance nervously at us. It was clear she was frightened. Amused by her reaction, I slowly approached her. "It's been a while, Susan." "Oh, yes. Where are the kids?" "We left them at my parents' today." "Like we told you, a little boy was born." "Really?" Susan's face was tense. Was she afraid of being retaliated against by me? Or perhaps she was scared that the marriage of her other son might fall apart. Either way, she was clearly frightened. Then, loud enough for my sister-in-law to hear, I said, "The place where you grabbed me before still has a bruise." While saying this, I rolled up my sleeve and showed my left wrist. Then, the red marks on my left wrist became visible, and the relatives began to murmur. Of course, it was a fake made with makeup. Even though it was just a ruse, Susan panicked. "Tracy, what are you saying?" I continued unabated. "Because you grabbed me so hard. It really hurt. Stop that right now." While I was pregnant, I had to handle all the cooking and cleaning on my own. And then you went and threw cold water on me. That was just the worst. "Be quiet," Susan suddenly shouted, but the attention of those around her was captured. She frantically started making excuses to the relatives. She claimed that none of it happened, that I was lying. Then, holding my wrist, I said, "It still hurts now, and you say I'm lying. How sad." Then, triumphantly, Susan yelled at me, "You liar. I grabbed your right hand. And there's no way it still hurts after so many months." At that moment, the back room fell silent. "You've slipped up." Susan was shocked by my words. Naturally, after her own admission, she was completely shunned by the relatives. Even the relatives of my sister-in-law were outraged. "Is this how you treat your own daughter-in-law? Forget the marriage and this ceremony." Meanwhile, Susan was at a loss, and Dan tried to smooth things over. But it was futile. After confirming the situation, my husband and I left the scene. I later heard that the marriage was called off due to the relatives of my sister-in-law taking issue with Susan's behavior. They even demanded a large sum as compensation. But there was no money available to cover it. In the end, My in-laws and my brother-in-law fled during the night but were quickly apprehended. Then, they ended up working at the company of the woman. They were supposed to marry to repay the compensation. Additionally, that company took over the work left by my in-laws and retained the employees. That the employees were safe was a small consolation. As for us, we remained a family of 4, with no particular changes except for my husband's workplace. However, that incident made my husband much tougher. He's more reliable than before, and I think that's a good thing. I came to understand something really important. As well, you can't play favorites with kids. It's crucial to love them equally. Susan helped me see that, and I'm a bit grateful to her for it. And I really appreciate that my husband is a good man. Especially since he had a mom like Susan growing up.